Welcome to cubfluffer, a program dedicated to finding out how identity informs people's work and process in the arts. Cubfluffer is produced by myself, Gabe Flores, and Mark Martinez. Today we're talking to Tim Combs, who is who's an artist in town, also an installationist. What else would you say?
An activist. I do
organizer.
I organize. I do a lot of education and teaching at lots of levels, mostly with kids these days.
So, how did you first get into the arts thing?
It's interesting. I have done many things. Way too many to make it easy to find a real career. I got lucky that I had enough money to go to Europe in 2000. I came back from Europe after seeing lots of art and architecture and realized that I was supposed to do something to really have conversations with people. I was lucky also that I was able to go to college and not incur any student loans, which allowed me to go through a master's program in popular culture studies where I got some sort of framework on types of conversations. But those two periods of time are 10, 15 years apart. And coming back, I then got into bands in my 30s and then started doing performance art, and maybe more intervention-like art, and I was kind of disappointed in that. I didn't really understand how creative people need to attach to a community of creative people. But I got that knowledge of how that works in music, and then I went back into working in offices for a few years. Got sick, and then took some time off and started working with my hands and realized that I was supposed to be working with my hands my entire life. When you're smart, or you're book smart, I should say, in the time that I went to school, they didn't let you take VOTEC classes. They made you take college prep courses. So now I'm really excited and happy that I'm starting this sort of journey of learning how to talk with my hands in some way.
What is that like, having extensive book knowledge at the master's level, but in something that's outside of art? How does that prior life inform your hand life?
It's interesting. I think one of the things that I'm really now focused on is this, and maybe it's been focused since before I went to grad school, was this understanding of how boxes operate. One of the things that draws me to talking to you and draws me to place is this constant conversation that you and I have had outside of this sort of interview, which is, again, another kind of box. Where it's like, and how these boxes sort of constrain and restrict our behavior, but also can be used to see deeper into certain things because the focus gets narrowed. If anything, I'm not doing anything differently, I believe, because I went to graduate school. It's more like I had learned another jargon, kind of like when I started working in the nonprofit world. I had to learn their jargon, or when I worked for Enron, I had to learn their jargon. And I think the book smart that I am allows me to learn other people's jargons and then figure out how to use them. What mostly this discovery, this like constant doing of research and this constant reading that I've been doing since a very early age, it just keeps giving me more information. It's like I'm wanting to constantly read every part of the world. And so I wouldn't say that graduate school informed me, or it just gave me this jargon that as I progress through life, I find these places that I'm like, oh, I think like that. This is a language I can use to describe how I'm already thinking.
So do you feel that there's this, there's a Tim that is just like the essence of Tim, and then there's Tim that's taking in knowledge?
Well, that's the existential dilemma, isn't it? In some essence, we do make ourselves as we go through time. But then there's also the people and the institutions and the structures around us that kind of tell us who we are as well. I mean, in a really banal level, it's kind of why I believe astrology works. People tell you who you are, therefore you either believe them or don't believe them. And so if you just keep getting informed about you were born in September, you're supposed to be this way, and everybody acts like you're that way, you learn to adopt that to get along. And that there's a tension there. And that's the dilemma. How much of it is me and how much it is the outside world. So do I believe that there's some deep structural person inside me that can't be changed? Sure, but I don't have a complete control of how that person comes out.
Yeah, and as you that is existing as the thing that is communicating that essence, the object that's taking in that knowledge, you would never be able to ever see.
No, I think I see it sometimes. I believe it. I call it character, and that's a very problematic word these days. But I know that there's somebody in me that has a desire for X things that doesn't seem to have any beginning. And I guess that's an argument too. A lot of people talk about that there's a period of development, especially for little kids. You can see basic personality in babies, and you can see how that moves through time. So we have to acknowledge that there's something there. Whether how accessible it is, and more importantly, when you have the authority over yourself to access it, that's a whole other matter. But I do know that there's a deep character of me of wanting to read the world. It comes up over and over again my entire life.
So what ended up bringing you to Portland?
My truck broke down. That's simplistic, but I had gotten out of school and I didn't really have a lot of direction, and I decided that working in a bookstore would probably be the most awesome thing ever. And it was a period of time that there was a recession like there is now. And so it was hard to find any jobs, and since I didn't have a lot of direction anyway, finding a bookstore job was awesome, because I could sit around with a bunch of people who were overeducated because of the recession and talk about books. Well, as that string was playing out, I decided I would leave Kansas City and try to find a place that was a little bit more tolerant, that was easier for me to get a job with long hair and being brown, and just started driving around the country. But I had been here before. I had been to Portland for work a couple times because of the bookstore. I worked for a chain bookstore, which no longer exists. I had come through to visit and went to visit some friends up in Washington, and came back because my truck broke down, was able to move back to Portland, and a friend of mine had worked at a temp agency. And so when I got this opportunity to work as a temp to pay for my truck, I ended up falling in love with everything out here. There's a lot of things I don't like about here, but for the most part, the tolerance that is here allowed me to become myself. Mm-hmm. So I went back home and got all the rest of my stuff and ended up staying here for 15 plus years now.
Oh, wow.
I'd been lucky that while I was here, I had jobs that allowed me to go travel, and I'm also lucky that this whole phase of me being here is after in my 30s and on. So I already had lived in a lot of other cities and experienced a lot of other things before I moved here. So I don't feel like I needed to find a new place to live once I found some place that was decent that I could actually work with.
So it's interesting to think about location as geographic, but also the locations we end up carrying with us. What are some of the locators that are always with you?
Some of the locators.
Yeah, or or locations that you carry with you.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're influenced by your experiences, but I always feel like this location I'm in is mine, and I'm still the same kind of me. But I do know that I am allowed to be certain ways here. If I'm in Kansas City, I get talked to certain ways. If I'm in Miami, I get talked to other ways. When I'm in LA, partly I think because of the way I look, and that I'm not moisturized or something, I get talked to in certain ways. And it's really amazing here. I spend a lot of time wearing grubby clothes, and I have this problem now that I forget to change, and I'll go days and days not changing my clothes. Most other places I've lived, people look at me as homeless. I get that kind of aroma that a lot of people in Portland have, where they smell like humanity. That's how I've always heard it called.
They smell like the apocalypse.
Right, yeah, exactly. I know those people too. But in most other places, people treat you completely differently.
So give me an example of that. How is being treated in Kansas different than being treated in Miami to LA?
You mean on just a base level?
Yeah, you said that.
Well, if I go
differently.
No, sure, totally. This might happen to me in the suburbs a little bit too here. I have this good friend, one of my best friends, just total generic white guy. I think that's how he would describe himself. He's an instructor, college instructor, and so he's kind of the odd one in his family actually because of that. And when we first became friends in Kansas City, we would go shopping, and it just blew him away how much I get followed. And the commonality of everyday life, this perfect thing that would happen almost every time I went into a store, even grocery stores. That's the telling thing of grocery stores, is that eventually I would catch the shadow out of the corner of my eye, and I learned to play with the shadow. This is something that does not happen to me here. Or if it does happen to me, it's very rarely. That never happened to me in Miami either. And I was in Coconut Grove for a big chunk of the time that I was wandering in and out of Miami. But it happens in the South a bit. It definitely happens in the Plains and Midwest more than anything. And it's simply because, again, like I was saying, I know who I am, but other people decide who I am. And so, what do I do with that? I get to play with it. Some people get really offended and go and get in those people's faces. Again, it's personal response.
Yeah, locators are kind of funny like that. You're not really aware. I'm not aware of my locators. because I don't have to think about them. It's only when someone makes it known that they ask me, like, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm exposed. But it's like they're making it, they're pronouncing it, they're reminding me that something is different.
I guess I'm hyper aware of that, and not in any, like, I don't use hyper in any like post-structuralist sense, but just I'm intensely aware of all these things. Maybe it's a generational thing. I'm a little bit older than you, and my parents got married when it was illegal for them to marry. They married in a state that it was legal to marry, but it wasn't federal law yet. And as we moved a lot, my dad was an aircraft contractor, so we moved every 2 months on average for the first 7 years of my life, and then we moved about 6 or 7 more times after that before we sort of finally stabilized at the beginning of 6th grade for me. And so even being a 2-3-year-old, there was so much weird and constantly changing stuff that I hold on to these things where I see how people operate. I notice how people see us. I notice when the cops stop us every week for the first 2 years we lived in Wichita just to check our papers. But this is just what I always remember. And so when I talk to people about this, I'm like, oh, wow, that's right. That didn't happen to you. You're 10 years younger than I am. They stopped doing that. And I don't really even want to know what it must have been like prior to that. But they, definitely in Wichita, we got told multiple times we were getting basically stopped because we were mixed. That becomes problematic.
How do some of your other locators, how do people respond to those in different locations? I guess we can do that.
Okay. I see what you want to get away from geography completely.
We can talk about geography.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's the thing about like this internal landscape. And in some sense, it's like it seems like you're asking me to sort of line out these different parts of my personality and my behavior. So I am intensely efficient when it comes to things in my life. I don't like to waste things. I don't like to throw things out. I save my finger and toenail clippings in my hair and put it in the compost heap. So all of these things that make up myself, I'm constantly using to find commonality with groups or with people, so you have something to talk about. But at the same time, intensely aware that, yes, I'm a unique collection of things.
So what are some of the things what are some of the identifiers in that collection that you mentioned?
You want me to talk less abstractly?
I think I'm curious about some of those variables. If it's a collection, I'm curious about the things that are in that collection.
Yeah, right. When you say that you're not intensely aware, or you're not aware of some of these things in your character, you don't really know how to access them. It's almost like I feel like to talk about myself in certain ways is to put myself in these boxes, and I kind of eschew the boxes. I use them where I don't want to give an enumerated list. Like, I can sit there and say I can talk about my parentage. I can talk about the income level I was born at. I can talk about like the sort of class status I was at.
Or are at.
Or what I'm currently at.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still, I don't believe that income level and class status are the same. And so I may be a unique collection of individuals, but what's most interesting about me is that if somebody looks at me and sees me as a black person, or like people used to think I was Puerto Rican all the time as a little kid, or they see me as a hippie because I have long hair, that's less interesting to me than the fact that, yeah, but you and I shop at the same grocery store. I'm constantly looking for that, but I'm aware of how people treat me because of that.
I think it's really interesting to be able to find out what are the things that make us a little bit different from each other, and then we can see like, oh wow, I can reach over to you, and it's like we can discuss the differences to find commonalities, because we don't all fit into each other. So there are going to be these things, it's like a Venn diagram, so that there's that part that we are all connected, but there are these parts that, because of our upbringing, because of our education, because of our class status, we do have differences.
Yeah, but maybe we do have differences, but they're arbitrary.
Yeah, they are.
They're completely arbitrary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I sometimes wonder if like this focus on that, especially by people who are what do they call it now? You and I are come from unrepresented communities, which is complete crap. Underrepresented, maybe in this locale, maybe in this geographic space, or maybe in this socio-geographic space is probably a better way to put it. I had somebody tell me today that Texas is awesome because Texas is really diverse. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not, I go, there's more, yeah, sure, like so's Alabama and Mississippi. But here is a more tolerant place, Portland. Even though that they have their own issues because of lack of diversity, with like things that some people would call racism. And there's definitely libertarian sort of xenophobia about what goes on here, which is actually beautiful at times. And I sometimes watch in the art world, especially, or at least maybe in the cultural artifact world, this sort of tendency to lump artists or creators or commenters into their groups of class. That's really problematic to me. Like, I don't want to be known as the brown artist who talks about brown things, ever. Even though I may talk about class and status. But the tendency is if I give too much of my indicators, that it looks like that's what I'm really about. I laugh all the time about sort of the pop interventions of brown or black with a K, no C, artists that just play the first order. Like, look, hi, come talk to your black friend. You know, they get money for that, or they do the things that just constantly repeat. Because I know who I am, but I want to be able to comment about the same things everybody else does. And I don't want to give we've talked about this before. Like, I don't want to give too many indicators up front, because that means that I'm going to be seen in that light. And people might look at me like, well, he gets to comment only on that. And that did happen to me a number of times, where the professors would think I was going to talk about something else. And I'm like, wait a minute, I got to talk about this too. This is part of my culture. I mean, those kinds of things is like, wait a minute, why would you think that? Why would you think that I wasn't participating in the same culture as you?
So when we talk about like these identifiers, we also there's ways to think about privilege in those. What is your favorite privilege when it comes to your identifiers?
What is my favorite privilege?
What is your favorite privilege?
What is my favorite of my privilege?
Yeah, of your privilege.
Yeah, well, I can pass as white. You know, I'm articulate. I mean, that sounds really pandering, but it's true. I get that all the time. I had a conversation with somebody that we know in the art world the other day.
You can name names.
I don't ever remember his name. I never remember this guy's name. But I was talking about like passing and how, you know, he said the thing like, oh yeah, you're articulate. And I'm like, yeah, that's not the only reason I'm passing.
Yeah.
I'm passing because I share the culture in the same way.
Passing is more than a grade.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting that people hear that like, you don't have to be white to be able to use white privilege. It's more the adoption of a culture. And if you're able to adopt the dominant culture or the hegemonic culture, or, I mean, I think I can probably think of a few more ways that people talk about that. If you're able to figure out how that game was played, or how you move up the steps of the ladder, that's awesome.
Yeah, privilege is kind of funny like that. I mean, when I think about privilege sometimes, I think about how it is that I can become invisible. I know that I pass in that sense. Like in the art community, I seldomly ever get asked like where I'm from, or like what does my skin tone mean.
Oh, I still do all the time. In fact, I would say that like most people are passing. I don't really truly believe that the way that this era of structure is organized, that most people are in the dominant group. Most people are not in the dominant group, and I think there's a lot of consternation amongst folks in trying to figure out their place.
So what is your least favorite disadvantage?
My least favorite disadvantage? My least favorite disadvantage is I really wish that people weren't seen first, that they were heard first. I get so many, it's the kind of constant, like, you do a lot of connecting with people on email or over the phone, and then, or for me, and then I meet them and they have the big eyes, you know? And I don't think it has to do with race per se or class per se, but I really wish that it was a lot easier for people who aren't going to look the way that they sound, maybe, or the way they come across in writing, to be taken like that always. And I don't really mind being broke. I talk about it a lot, like I wish I had a little bit more money, but mostly since I do so much of my activism organizing in this world where we talk about waste all the time, there is so little that we really need. But these are issues that everybody shares, and I don't see them as like endemically problematic just for me and artists in general.
Have you ever used have you ever used a disadvantage to your advantage?
It's funny. It's like I was born in the era where affirmative action was definitely rooted. I got scholarships based on merit. And all of a sudden, weirdly, some of those scholarships in the 80s, I don't think they really do this anymore, they would attach like 10% more money based on your class or your race or ethnicity or your and then or your need. And then you have to talk to people in those departments and the other students about this. Like, yeah, you get a merit scholarship, but it gets tainted by the extra tiny bit of money. And then like other students then decide to take your side and like call out on the people that are like calling you out, and it becomes this whole weird thing. It's like, thanks for giving me an extra $50 a month to go to school.
Was it worth it?
It's like, and it's like, wow, so some people aren't going to want to listen to me simply because of the way that all played out. Now, don't get me wrong, affirmative action still is a great thing, but ambition needs to be in there as well. I mean, I've always had that sort of problematic conversation with people about, yeah, there's plenty of people that need to get more money, just general. And yeah, great, they had to come up with a way to give more non-white people money. Problematic. Can we get back to the conversation of let's just give more people money to go to school rather than focusing on, oh, see, we give the money the wrong way. If anything, that's the biggest issue. Sometimes organizations will want me to be part of them because I fulfill a quotient for them. And again, it's this weirdness of like giving you like you get one step sometimes. And you still have to be able to get to them and have the conversations and say the right things. But then they're like, oh yeah, sure, we would love you to be part of this because we need to have more people like you. And they'll blatantly say that to your face. And you're like, you mean people that wear blue shirts?
Yeah, we need more people of your community.
And I'm like, do you know who else I hang out with? I mean, and I have definitely seen that. I can't name names that this would get
go
me in
ahead
trouble.
and name
No,
names.
I'm not going to do it. But I've seen this in some of the proposals that have been sent my way. It's like, oh, who do I want to be? Like, what character do I want to pull out for this thing? And in that sense, I guess that some of these things that you ask me, like, who am I, what are me, they're mostly like costumes. And I wonder sometimes, like, if people who don't perceive themselves as victims or don't perceive themselves as people of lesser privilege, I wonder if they, like, are just upset because they can't wear as many costumes as I can.
So, do you see yourself as a victim in any way?
I see myself as victimized occasionally.
But
But like, I don't think most people that come out of any culture see themselves as being a victim. They see themselves as being a person. Yeah, sure, I've been victimized. I mean, I've been in towns that got beat up for being black. That happens occasionally. Especially happened a lot more 20, 30 years ago. I would not say that I have, in most of the places I've been, felt that I was being given a short rope. If anything, I've been given opportunities, and I think most people are given opportunities once you make personal connection with individuals. I think the hard part is trying to actually make these conversations with individuals. But that doesn't matter who or where you are. I mean, that is just kind of the nature of the beast.
who do you feel is your audience?
I struggle with that, but I really have this desire to figure out how it is I can talk to anybody about anything. I talk about my work a lot as lenses. I can use them to see things in a certain light, and if I get you to see them in a certain way, I can then show you how you can use them to see things in a different way. And what I find, especially like at street fairs and art fairs, is that people are drawn to what they consider to be aesthetic beauty, really is. And then when I tell them, well, that was all made from reclaimed materials, or actually a bunch of kids made that, or I did that in a minute, like not talking to them about the subject matter, which is what draws people mostly at fairs, and being able to get them to have these conversations of like, there's a whole lot of other things that are going on here, I find really exhilarating, really, really exhilarating. I think in the art world, well, at least what I've seen of it now, is that we get into these weird places and these weird boxes where we want to say pithy things about the art, or we want to talk about the art in the right way, and we don't come at it like the average person who isn't in the art world, who when they see something, it just hits them and it touches them. That's amazing. I want to be able to figure out how to make every single group, every single person have that experience. And so it's this approach to trying to figure out how to talk to different people in different ways, kind of find the commonalities. That's what makes it easier, I think, for us to do that.
Yeah, making them comfortable, trying to get them to respond in an uninhibited manner, where they can use just honest language.
To be safe, safe in everyday language. I spent a lot of time, especially when I was doing a lot of cultural studies, thinking about art is everyday life, or art isn't what everyday life is. And that line is so bizarre sometimes to me, because art is everyday life for people who make and live in the art world. And art is in everybody's lives.
Yeah.
Always, even if it's a silly piece of art they bought at Target.
So, who isn't your audience?
I would hope to think that everybody's my audience, but I do know that there are people that are very, very resistant. I have friends, because I'm from the middle of the country, that are super conservative, and I have friends that are super liberal, and it's funny sometimes being alone in the middle, especially in our polarized climate right now. But I always can find commonality with those people. The problem is even though I find commonality with folks, that doesn't necessarily mean they want to find the commonality with me. And if anything, those people are resistant to hearing messages, to having conversations, to viewing art in ways. I do think it's really hilarious sometimes, like you go to these giant museums and you see the history of contemporary art and installation, and you'll see pieces that are just like giant machinery, or minimalist stuff that's just replications. And guys, you'll see quite often it's men with their wives on tour on vacation, and they'll be like, "That looks like an air conditioner," but they don't want it to look like an air conditioner, So
Yeah.
But they might actually be willing to have the conversation because they're seeing it and they're getting it. Actually, they're getting it. They just don't. They need to read the liner notes or something.
Well, they're willing to say what they see,
And that's
the thing that we
that's
might
the
all see.
engagement, right?
But we don't want to see that. We know that there's something more, and so it's almost like a pronouncement. Like, this is what I'm seeing. Somebody give me some information. Like, all I'm seeing is conflict newspaper.
Right, as opposed to somebody who's just not willing to even talk about it, just put their nose in there. I'm like, I'm not going to go do that. That's not important. So if anything, it's people that are resistant. But I'm still trying to figure out that too.
So what do you get from a life in the arts?
A lot of economic stress. But more importantly, I think the thing that has led me through all of these phases of my life, I almost became an engineer, and then I was into sociology, and I was doing cultural studies, and then I worked in retail, and I became an office worker, and then I became a landscaper. I mean, I just kept searching for these ways to have autonomy, and this is the only thing where I'm allowed to have autonomy almost no matter what the structure is. I have to be very willing for collaboration, which I really, really desire. I want to go someplace and have a layer of, if not site specificity, if site means place or site means locale and geography, I don't mean a strict Cartesian geography. There's a geography of the mind that I'm also playing with. And so I'm looking for collaboration. I want to talk to people about ideas. I want to find these things, but I always get to make it mine. I always get to make it up as I go along. And that to me is free, but it's my choice. And because of that, I think that's part of the thing I give to the world. The things that I make and the way that I make them, the process that I'm going through about it, that I'm very open and honest. The fact that I get to talk to different groups in different places of different class and ethnicities, that to me is the art.
That's interesting because that's exactly the next question. Like, what does your art add to the world?
I'm a person, like you're a person, that has individual things. And I get to do this in the way that I get to do it, meaning that everybody should be allowed to get to do it the way they want to do it. If you have to learn a jargon, if you have to go without food for a week, if you have to move to another town, those are things that other people do for a whole host of other human activities. Art isn't just for people that grow up in upper middle class or rich homes that have the luxury to do art and the money to go to art school. I mean, it's desire and ambition that drives things. And once you start getting a taste of what you're worth and how you're respected for that worth in the art world, I think it takes you a long way.
Where would you like to be in 10 years?
I like to be doing this at a level where I felt like I did have some more sustainable life pattern. I moved my shop 4 or 5 times last year, and I moved where I lived 4 times because I'm constantly looking for a space to create. That seems to be something I'm doing right now. I'm wasting time, I believe, doing that. And that I don't have a great space right now. We'll see how long it lasts. But I would like to have stability there. And I feel like that is something that's attainable in 10 years. I will be in a more stable position that I can continue to do the things I'm doing. I also hope to have a lot more opportunities come by my way. And I will take the ones, I'll take the ones I want to, as opposed to taking all of them at the time. And I'm feeling that coming more and more. People are asking me more things, more to do more things, or to think about more things, and that's awesome. That means I'm being respected by my peers, I'm being respected by other people, institutions, and the organizations that want to have these conversations.
So the follow-up to that is, or I guess the second part of that is, where do you think you'll be in 10 years?
I think I'll still be doing these things. I will maybe living in Portland. I may not be. I don't really think about it that way. I found that more I let go of pushing, the more things started coming to me. So who knows? I mean, there's a kind of myth in the art world that you'll eventually hit this chunk of money or this massive opportunity, and you don't know if it's going to happen again after that. So you just have to go do it, and maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't, but that's not important. I'm still going to be having these conversations. And if I don't get to the intent, if it takes me 30 years or 60 years to get to the place of where I want to be, that's fine, because I know that I'm going to continue to get opportunities. I know I'm going to constantly be showing in places and doing things with education and organizing and activism. And I think those all are part of the art.
Okay. Thank you so much. This was
Thank
fun.
you. Yeah.
Well, yes, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. I love when you do that.
Yeah, yes, of course. Yes. Yeah, this was fun. Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's funny talking to you, Gabe. It really is. I find I have to dance around this like pin of identity that you